In May 2024, against the backdrop of an impending general election and a generally disastrous time for the Conservatives, 107 metropolitan, unitary and district councils and 10 mayors will go to the polls. Ahead of polling day, we're hosting a series of conversations with council leaders who are currently running progressive coalitions. We want to shine a light on the realities of cooperation and look at the impact of their time in power. Joining us for this episode is Lucy Nethsingha, the leader of Cambridgeshire County Council. Hello, Lucy. It's great to talk to you today for our local leaders spotlight. So I'll start by asking you where you are and how you are today.
Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm the leader of Cambridgeshire County Council, and I'm fine today. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. So thanks for joining us again. Tell us a little bit about the history of the coalition in Cambridgeshire, when it started, and what are some of the things that you've achieved so far?
So our coalition started after the local elections in May 2021. The council previously had been a Conservative majority council and had been Conservative-led for many years before that, although not always Conservative majority. But in May 2021, it moved to the Conservatives lost control quite narrowly. So there was the council has 61 places on it. By putting together a coalition of 20 Liberal Democrats, 9 Labour and 4 Independents, we were able to outvote the Conservatives by 5 votes. But it was relatively tight. Since then, we have been running the council with that coalition. The numbers have changed slightly in that the Liberal Democrat numbers have gone up by 2 through winning a by-election and a Conservative defection, and the Conservatives have also lost a few other councillors to a sort of independent but not part of our joint administration group. So the numbers are slightly less tight than they were 3 years ago. But it's been a very enjoyable business running a coalition. I have enjoyed working with people from other parties a great deal. And I think it's been, I feel that we've done some very successful things in Cambridgeshire.
That's brilliant. Thanks for that. Next question. Can you highlight a kind of specific example of how working with other parties has helped you to achieve a better outcome? So one good way of looking at this is there anything that you might have struggled to do without the support of coalition partners? And aside from just kind of concrete policy and things, are there any kind of cultural things that you've done differently or worked differently with in coalition?
So in our case, we would not, if we hadn't put the coalition together, we would not be setting the policy agenda for the council. And that policy agenda has been quite different because of our coalition and our joint administration, rather than what it would have been under the Conservatives. I'll talk about some of the kind of specific policy things that we've done that would be different in a minute, but there are also other benefits to working with other parties, which I think it's really worth thinking about, whether you have the option of doing majority control or not. In our case, we cover quite a broad geographic area, and there are differences in the political makeup across that geography. And by having a joint administration that contains a number of different groups, we have had much better representation across 4 of those districts than we would have done for any single one of those groups. There's still one district which is extremely Conservative dominated. I think all of the county councillors on that place are Conservative, so we don't have representation there, but we have quite good representation across across 4 out of the 5 districts. And I think that matters. I think it's important to that sort of local knowledge of different places is helpful. On the policy agenda, there's no question that the things that we've done have been different from what it would have been if there'd been a Conservative administration. 2 of the things I'm most proud of are the focus that we've had on maintaining as much support for the free school meal vouchers as we possibly can. We know that child poverty is a huge and rising problem across the whole country, and that the families who are on free school meals are some of the lowest income families in the whole country, and also that child poverty has a very significant impact not only on a child's education, but therefore also on all of their future ability to earn and thrive. So I think I am really pleased that one of the key priorities from the joint administration, from even just kind of when we were first setting up our agreement between the parties, was on free school meals, and we've absolutely been kept to that promise, and we will keep to that promise all the way through, of making sure that families on free school meals get vouchers in the holidays, so that the holidays are a difficult time for families on low incomes, and every bit we can help them is worth doing. So I'm really proud that we've done that. And I know that other areas have also provided school meal vouchers, but mostly the amount has dropped over time, whereas we've so far managed to maintain ours at the level of the full free school meal value, even though that isn't high enough. The other thing that I think we wouldn't probably have done if we hadn't been in a joint administration, it certainly wasn't part of the Liberal Democrat manifesto, is the focus that we've put on paying not only the council. I think we would have concentrated on paying the council staff the real living wage, but actually it was one of the things that the Labour group really wanted in our joint agreement, was making sure that we were paying as many of our contracted staff the real living wage as well. And the interesting thing about that is that when we initially put it into the joint administration agreement at the start of our administration, it felt a very difficult, ambitious thing to do because there were quite high costs attached to it. As it's turned out, putting those things into our budget 3 years ago has meant that the increases in the national living wage have not hit our finances as much or as hard as they have hit other councils' finances, because we were already planning to pay a higher level to our care staff, if that makes sense. So in that particular case, doing the right thing, even though it felt hard 3 years ago, has ended up also being very helpful for the financial stability of our council. And that's something that I think it's important to bear in mind, that sometimes recognising that you're going to have to pay some costs and putting them in the budget because that's what you need to do is the right thing to do further down the line financially, because it means you make the right decisions. So that was a really helpful thing. I'm sure I can think of other examples, but I'll stop there.
Yeah. That's brilliant. It sounds like you've collectively achieved some really great things, and it also sounds like a lot of the things were kind of straightforward for you to agree about, and there are lots of things that progressives generally agree on, which is one of the things that we're always keen to shout about. But I wonder, kind of on that point, what was it like forming the coalition? Was it kind of a tricky process, or was there enough common ground there for you to just kind of jump at the opportunity to work together and take the council in a new direction?
So there were bits of it that were very straightforward, and there were other bits of it that were more difficult. And some of the difficulties were to do with timing, and we had a very short time in which to try and set up the administration, because the previous administration, the Conservative administration, had completely assumed that they would have a majority or be leading the council. And therefore, they'd set the date of the annual full council meeting a very short time after the elections. So we effectively had about a week in order to set up the joint administration and get all the people kind of agreed about who was going to do which role, and set down our joint administration agreement. So from a timing point of view, that was pretty hard work. And we didn't really have much support from the council officers in doing that because we were not yet a formed administration, so we kind of had to do it on our own. There were a number of things that made it less difficult than it might have been. One of those was that one of the first things we did was put the manifestos of the different groups next to each other to see how much overlap there was. And there was an extraordinarily large amount of overlap. So actually setting out a kind of direction of travel and a set of things that we wanted to achieve was not so difficult because actually there was an enormous amount that everybody agreed on. There were some small points of difference around kind of this being a bigger priority than that, but mostly everybody agreed most of the things that were in the manifestos. It was about priorities. So that wasn't so hard. The other thing that I think helped then, but has been even more helpful in the 3 subsequent years, was that the personal relationships between many of the people doing that setting up were already good. I think it would have been much more difficult, if not impossible, to do that if we hadn't had good personal relationships to start with. So the relationship between me and the leaders of the Labour group and the independent group had been good for several years before that. The relationships between my deputy and the deputy leader of the Labour group were not quite as friendly, but they did know each other quite well, even if there was a sort of slightly spiky mutual respect, which again wasn't necessarily a bad thing. But I do think that those personal relationships are really important. And as you would expect, over the course of 3 years of quite kind of interesting politics, there have been things that haven't been easy or straightforward. And I think those personal relationships are what have got us through those things. So even when, at that point when we were setting up, the policy agenda wasn't so difficult, but there have been difficulties later. And that with those things, those personal relationships become absolutely crucial.
That's great. That's a really good insight into kind of both the logistical and then also those cultural challenges that come with forming coalitions. So in terms of the upcoming local elections, what would you say to voters in your area? Would you encourage them to vote tactically, and what would you say kind of about your group's achievement in power and how you'd like them to kind of bear that in mind?
So in our local area at the moment, there are, because the way that the district council, so I lead a county council, we don't have elections for the county council this year. Within the county council area, only one of the districts has elections this year, and that's in Cambridge. And in Cambridge, actually, the competition is between the progressive parties on the whole. So my ward at the moment is a 3-way marginal between the Liberal Democrats, between Liberal Democrats, the Greens, and Labour. Telling people, I mean, obviously I want people to vote for me in my ward, but it's not really a tactical voting issue. No. There will be a couple of places in Cambridge where there are tactical voting issues. So there are sort of 2 or 3 wards where the Conservatives are trying to do better, but they don't have a single councillor in Cambridge at the moment. Actually, that's not true. They have one. They won a by-election last summer, so I forget, but they have one. So King's Hedges, where they won that by-election, people might well decide that they want to vote tactically in that election, but it's one of the very few places around Cambridge where there's a need for people to vote tactically, and in some respects, it's a nice position to be in, that people have a choice of which progressive party they want to choose. I think there are other parts. So Peterborough is a very different setup. So I'm also a representative on the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority Board, and we work very closely with colleagues in Peterborough. Peterborough is currently in no overall control, following the defection of a large number of Conservative councillors over the course of this year. And they have very important elections in May. And in Peterborough, I would certainly be encouraging anybody who wants to not have a Conservative councillor to be looking carefully at how many leaflets they get through the door and thinking about who is fighting hard in their patch, because it will probably make a difference there.
That's really interesting. Yeah, well, let's see how that goes in Peterborough.
Yes.
Generally, I think voters can tell who is kind of best placed in their area. And
Absolutely.
local parties increasingly seem to be on the same page about kind of letting that message get through in a lot of places. I mean,
well, you can usually tell who is putting a lot of effort into a particular area. Again, often by the volume of paper landing on your doorstep. It's often a good way of telling. And it's not unreasonable to think that the candidates who are putting a lot of effort into trying to get elected are the ones who want your vote. That some Conservative candidates manage to get a lot of literature through paid for by other people, and so it's not always an ideal way of looking at it, but it's often a good indicator.
I guess with there not being elections or many elections in your area, this might be a good question to think about in terms of Peterborough then. So what are the risks, would you say, of what would kind of happen if the Tories did really well in Peterborough, given kind of the general state of politics and the general state of local authorities? What do you think the risks are that voters should be aware of in tight races like that?
So I think it is about priorities, and I've just been explaining what some of the priorities for our joint administration were, to do with helping those who are really struggling with the cost of living, to do with supporting the care sector and making sure that we're paying carers enough so that we can try and get enough carers. It does actually matter who you elect for your local council. It makes a difference to the quality of your council services. And my perception of Conservatives in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is that they're much more interested in reducing the capacity of local authorities, making, and particularly, I mean, in our area and in Peterborough, they just seem to be the party of the car driver always, which is a bit depressing actually. And given that increasing numbers of people can't afford the insurance to drive a car, let alone the running costs, I think there are some quite serious issues about who's being represented by Conservatives in different places. So I think I would suggest that actually, if you want to have an authority which is focused on making sure that the services are there for the people who are the most vulnerable when they need them, you probably want to try and work out how to not have a Conservative.
Well,
there are other risks to do with campaigning together with other local parties, but in Peterborough, it definitely seems like a good plan.
Yeah, brilliant. Next question is focused a little bit beyond kind of local elections. So it'd be interested to hear your take on this. How might progressive parties in your area build on local collaboration at a general election? And what outcomes might you like to see in target seats near you at the general election?
So I think that the fact that we've got to know each other is quite helpful. It allows us to have conversations and to have just kind of knowledge about who is working hard and where. Again, I think that many residents will get to know gradually who is being particularly energetic in which places, and they should probably pay some attention to that. I know that, we have across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, there are 7 MPs, 6 of whom are Conservatives. So I would really love to see a more balanced representation from the. It is not the case that the residents of that area are represented by that balance among their MPs, and I would like to see a much more the way in which residents actually vote represented better among their MPs. In an ideal world, we would do that by some kind of proportional voting system. But given that we don't have a proportional voting system, residents will probably have to make up their own minds about who's most likely to win in their patch. And they will probably be able to get some idea about that from the scale of campaigning being done by different parties. Because we've been working closely with other parties on the county council, I know a number of the candidates who are probably likely to be standing for different parties for Parliament. And I know that some of them are going to be more energetic than others. And I'm quite pleased to see that some of the more energetic ones are standing in places where I know that the Liberal Democrats are not necessarily expecting to win. So we do sort of have... we have a bit of a sense about who's being the most active in different places. I'm also aware, though, that not all of our activists in all of our places recognise that, and I think that's probably true everywhere as well. There will be activists across the whole country who think they're going to win in places where they're not.
Yeah, absolutely, and I guess it's tricky, especially this time around, because it feels like an election where things are especially bad for the Tories, and so much is in reach for everyone else. But then, as you point out with your comments about the system, we are still kind of working within this kind of deeply rotten system, which means that however close things are, they can still be lost because of just the pure composition of the voting system. So, that's kind of all the more reason to try and promote collaboration and cooperation wherever possible. So next question I'd like to ask is about your time in the European Parliament. What differences kind of were you aware of between cooperation there and the culture of working together, especially compared with how we do politics over here in the UK?
So it is a really different system in the European Parliament, and there's never an expectation that any one party will be able to have a majority in the European Parliament. So ever since it was set up, there's been an expectation that different groups have to work together in order to get legislation through. And the Parliament that I was part of was the first one where it wasn't just the 2 largest groups who could gang up against everybody else. So always previously in the European Parliament, there had been a structure where the sort of large centre-right group and the large centre-left group, if they chose to get together, could outvote everybody else, which gave them a lot of power. And in the Parliament that I joined in 2019, that was not the case. There was always a need for at least 3 parties, the 3 largest parties, to work together in order to get things through. So that was the first time really that I had experienced a really big parliament like that, where all the different groups are having to work together to get a narrative and legislation through. It's not. I mean, it's been quite difficult, not only because the structures of the European Union are also being managed by Viktor Orban and others to prevent change, which is really disappointing. But it was. I mean, the sense of collaboration there. The structures for collaboration are very well trodden and well established, and everybody knows that it's all about kind of working out what you can agree with and where you can find points of agreement and compromise in order to achieve things. And that if you don't find points of agreement and compromise, what effectively happens is that nothing happens, and that's actually not very good for anybody. And this Parliament has achieved some really impressive things, actually, particularly on the green agenda, on the new Green Deal, and that's the American one, isn't it? But there's a European version of that. It's good.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll kind of see a shift towards a culture like that over here one day. That would be the ideal scenario.
That would be good.
So the final kind of serious question that we have before we ask a nice light-hearted one. This is a little bit more controversial maybe in the grander scheme of things. So if you don't have an answer for this one, if you'd rather us not do this one, that's absolutely fine. But I'll ask it anyway, which is, how would you say your attitudes locally differ from those at kind of a national level or your party HQ? Have you or your colleagues in the coalition ever experienced pushback from parties? Or has it all kind of been generally accepted that this is what happens?
So I think when we set up the joint administration in 2021, all of the parties were quite pleased to see that happening. I think politics at that point was in quite a different place, and the idea that progressive parties were going to have to work together in order to change the agenda was much more accepted. I think particularly after the pretty disastrous election of 2019, I think there was a sense that a lot of people were wanting to work together. And so when we set our coalition, our joint administration up, we didn't get any concern from any of the national parties about it, really. Since then, I think that there's been rather more concern from the central parties, both among the Liberal Democrats and in Labour. The independents obviously do what they like because they're independent. But I think both Liberal Democrats and Labour have got a little bit more nervous about the way in which agreements happen at local level between different parties. And I can sort of understand why the national parties are concerned about that. But I still think that there is a really useful space for discussion between progressive parties about how we campaign in a way which doesn't just let the right wing in. And I think that one of the things about that is that there's a very significant difference between campaigning in the kind of way that I've been describing, where you're just aware of where your colleagues are targeting. It's not that we're not planning to step down for anybody in the elections the elections for the county that are coming up in 2025. But we can focus our efforts. I mean, we will not. The Liberal Democrats are unlikely to be able to focus the same amount of effort on every seat across all 61 seats. And actually, given where the Labour Party are in our area, I don't think they will be able to either. And I would be surprised if the independents find fantastic, very energetic candidates in 61 seats. So there is plenty of room for standing candidates everywhere, but just being aware about where different people are likely to be putting their energy. And just to go back to the Cambridge situation, one of the things that makes this kind of come almost as second nature to us is that the Liberal Democrats and Labour fight each other very hard in Cambridge anyway. So we're quite accustomed to knowing that that's where that fight's going on. And then in other places, we're fighting different people. And it's just about letting those local differences happen and sometimes talking to each other. But we could talk to each other more effectively than we do, and I hope we will.
Thanks for that. So final question, which is just in the aim of finishing on a nice light note. What are you particularly excited about that's coming up in this year ahead? That can be kind of local elections wise, general elections, or anything else?
Oh gosh, having a change of government, getting rid of the Conservatives at national government level would be completely wonderful. As I mean, it has been the most extraordinary, frustrating 3 years in terms of dealing with national government, because you just never feel as if there's any sensible direction of travel. There's no long-term thinking whatsoever. As a council, we've had to deal with endless bidding for tiny amounts of money that when we get offered them, we don't get time to spend them. It's just been that they've been not only wrong, but also deeply incompetent. And I am just really hoping that a different government would at least have a slightly more long-term perspective than this one has. That would
Yeah.
be great. I'm sure there'll be other nice things this year as well, but please bring on that general election as soon as possible.
Yeah, I'm sure we'd all cheers to that at Compass. We're all very much looking forward to the opportunity to get lots of progressives elected in seats across the country who also are committed to changing the voting system for the House of Commons. So that's our
Hooray.
main campaign, and we're looking forward to the opportunity to get that message out.